From Ames, Iowa, National Public Radio, through the facilities of station WOI, presents selected talks from the 6th Annual Iowa State University Institute on World Affairs. This year, the Institute is examining the role of the military in the world, 1971. Today, you will hear two speakers. Hosea Williams speaking on the national effects of America's versus China's military-industrial complex, and Dr. Theophanis Stavro speaking on militarism in the modern world, the Greek experience. Hosea Williams, a prominent figure in the civil rights movement for many years, has just recently returned from a 4-month tour of Africa, mainland China, and Indochina. Mr. Williams spent 4 weeks in mainland China. And now, Hosea Williams of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference speaking on the national effects of America's versus China's military-industrial complex.
As a civil rights worker, historically we have, and as a black man, historically we have looked upon the military-industrial complex of our country as probably really being one of the greatest enemies of our country. You know, I just spent 4 weeks in the People's Republic of China. And although one of the sermons that I'm preaching now, or trying to teach now, is that one thing that the black community likes is an ideology that is relevant to the black way of life. And through certain mental processes and brainwashes, we have accepted the standards which white America lives by and tried to apply that to an unadaptable situation. And I'm really serious. I think that the thing that have frustrated the civil rights movement or the black revolution, whatever you call it, more than any other single thing, is the liking of an ideology that is relevant to the black experience or the black community. But my visit to China in discussing ideologies, I guess became more confused because I saw so much in China, and China was a great experience to me. I did not accept any new concepts, but certainly it put into a more of a perspective the concepts in which I've been hassling with over the past 10 years. But I found in China, and I'm giving you this background because of my feeling now toward, you might say, a national ideology. But I found in China very little difference in the truth in the way China is operated than you find the way America is operated. In this country, I guess the only basic difference is that in this country, the military-industrial complex totally decides and totally is in charge of the policy making of this country and controls those that carry out that policy, articulate that policy, and even to the point, through the military-industrial complex, controlled, you might say, the resources of the military. Now, in America, I strongly believe, and last year we organized what we call the War Against Repression, and we went to Wall Street, and we said to Wall Street that you cannot make any more money or dispense any more money until you first consider how the making of that money or the expending of that money affects the lives of human beings. That's virtually the same thing Mr. Nader said to the manufacturers, that your priority is profit, and you have therefore subjugated human dignity or human values, subjugated that to material wealth. Now, I feel like, I felt this for a long time, that our country, and it's unbelievable, who was that Pharaoh fiddle while Rome burned, that we would fiddle while America burns. And the same thing is happening to this country. It's nothing new. It happened to Rome. It happened to the British Empire. It happened to many empires in history. That our greatest enemy to our way of life, to our concept of life, to our theoretical way of life, that our greatest enemy is not some foreign ideology, it's not some foreign military power, but it's the hypocrisy in our way of life. That our country is being destroyed from within. Now, I find a difficulty in separating the military-industrial complex from any real decision that's being made in America. When I think of the cooperative structure that overtly is responsible for the perpetuation and continuation of poverty, I cannot separate the cooperative structure from the industrial military complex, from the military-industrial complex. When I think of the CIA, I cannot separate the activities of the CIA from the military-industrial complex. Therefore, I said that the military-industrial complex of this country is controlled by those same few families that control the economics of this country. Now, that's why I want you to take a look at China. I was kind of amazed when I found out 5% of the Chinese people, now the authorities in China said this to me, finally admitted this to me. They admitted 5%, that less than 5% of the Chinese people have been allowed to join the Communist Party up until this point. So what you have, in my estimation, in China, you have the intellectual elites, which are in control of the decision-making or the policy-making of the military-industrial complex of China, but they leave a certain latitude that the peasants and workers or the laboring force of China can operate within the scope of that latitude, which gives them the feeling that they are really making some decisions. But this is not true in America. I said to the Chinese, I said, this is as ridiculous as it is in America, where less than 10% of the population controls much over 80% of the wealth. And I'm talking about those few families that makes the policy for this country. And the instrument whereby articulating that policy is through the military-industrial complex. The two, when you start thinking about the cooperative structure and the military structure, or you start thinking about the industrial structure or the military structure, the two is, in my estimation, is inextricably bound. Totally controlled by the rich elite of this country. Now, that's the few families, the Rockefellers, the Fords, the DuPonts, and all of the, well, I won't say all, but the basic evils that have derailed the struggle for human dignity in this country. That's the murdering of President Kennedy. That's the murdering of Martin Luther King Jr. Now, I think the evils of America is nothing new. I think the same evils that we are hassling with today to save this country are evils that have confronted this country since its inception. That's why I get worried when my black brothers are duped into feeling that racism is our basic problem, when racism is really a symptom of a deeper frustration. But our basic problem is an economic problem. And we've always had this problem from the inception, from the birth of this country. That's why it was necessary first to, well, when our forefathers first established this what I consider as an unworkable, obsolete economic system at the birth of the country. That's why it was necessary to go back to Europe and get their fathers and their mothers and their uncles and their cousins out of prisons and to bring them to this country and try to stabilize an obsolete economic system. That was with the indentured slaves. But what happened with indentured slavery, they worked their way out of slavery, and then they too became a burden on this already obsolete, unworkable economic system. Then the next slave was the Indians. The Indians had been treated so inhumanely until about the time they learned to plow, they were dead. And that's when they sent Marco Polo to commit the world's, in my estimation, greatest sin, to the banks of Africa where black people was born to be free. And they brought us down to slavery. And up on our bodies, they put a price just like we were merchandise. So the Muslim go on to tell that story saying, so my friends, it's easy to tell. America might have been once a white man's heaven, but it's always been a black man's hell. But our basic problem, we are part of a class struggle. Now, I don't like to say that our problem is no different from any other problem, because our problem has the greatest amount of undergirding with racism. But racism is a symptom of a deeper frustration. As I say, I think that our military-industrial complex is totally controlled by the rich elite. But the rich elite allows the intellectual to administer our military-industrial complex. But they never become a part of that ruling class, that real basic decision-making class. Now, the real hypocrisy of the carrying out of our military-industrial complex programs is that it's really articulated by what I would consider the majority in some instance, or I would consider maybe articulated by the reactionary conservatives. If you look at all of take our military, and I just left Vietnam, and one thing that is true, unquestionable in Vietnam, that black soldiers, number one, are being subjected to the same racism in Vietnam that they're being subjected to in Mississippi. Now, the cause of that problem is due to it's the poor whites in the South that basically ends up as lifetimers in the Army. They get away to what is it? These military schools, the Navy Academy and West Point, and they are not. That's the best life they've ever been offered, and they are not coming out of that Army. They are going to stay there until retirement. So that's who is really articulating or carrying out the program of the Army. It was real sad, in Vietnam, because I saw America at her worst. I saw America in Vietnam. I saw America at her worst. But to see guys walking around like, and these were basic. I tried to find out basically who these guys were, walking around like Buck Jones or Hoop Gibson or Tim McCoy, the gun slinging way down here, and always sitting up smiling, polishing his rifle. But those are the guys that go to West Point or to the Naval Academy or Air Force Academy and become lifers in the military. But it's the intellectuals that are making this decision, but controlled by a few families. Now, the difference in China would be that it's the intellectual elite that are in charge of the policy making, but allows a certain degree of participation by the masses, enough to make them think that they are involved. And this is how Mao Zedong took over China. This was due to the success of the Communist Party. While Chiang Kai-shek was wading away and swimming in American foreign aid and interested in the bright lights of the city, Mao Zedong organized the countryside. He organized the millions of peasants, and in China, the credibility gap or the living gap is much, much wider. The peasantry of China, I doubt seriously we've ever had in America. Now, this is before liberation in China, because the number of those that live like you and I live, and I consider you are not rich, I'm not. The number that lived in the average category were very, very small compared to America. Our real poverty-stricken is in the minority, but the real peasant and poverty-stricken in China was in the vast majority. Our military-industrial complex gives false stability to what I go back historically and say is an unworkable economic system. It's the police force for this rich elite with this lifestyle geared to profit making, where the rich will continue to get richer and the poor will get poorer. Now, sometimes I ask myself when I see the direction of the economy of this country, and I say to myself, is Rap Brown right? Will things have to get so bad until the masses will rise up and burn this nation down and give God a chance to raise up a nation that will obey? I have to ask myself sometime, is Rap Brown right? Now, that's a difference again in China. In China, there's an old saying we used to use in the Baptist church, let your light so shine that the world may see your good works. The most desirable citizen in China is the intellectual elite, with a few of the peasantry in the Communist Party. But the second in China in prestige living, in life, is the military. They start them now from kindergarten school with the Junior Red Guards, and the Junior Red Guards, part of them will be able to get into the Red Guards, and part of the Red Guards, it's a kind of a screening process, will be able to end up in the army. And in China now, to become the average soldier, and this is excluding that intellectual elite, the average soldier, to get in the Chinese army, you just about have to be from a peasant family or a working family. Now, when I say give false stability to this unstable economy of ours, certainly I think, and I'm certain if you have, and I assume I have a little intelligence, but if you've been in the civil rights movement as long as I have, certainly you've got to be to a great degree paranoid by now. But honestly, when Mr. Nixon, some 9 months before the election, pulled that freeze off, I think I think our economy is in serious trouble that we are not being told about. And some of us are so naive not to even think in that vein, like the truth about the Vietnam War never was revealed until the Pentagon's paper leaked out, and we found out that the leaders of this country did not trust the minds of the country, the people of the country. Now, the same military-industrial complex that prevails, I say, and if I'm wrong, I hope you'll correct me in the question and answer period, but I consider our military-industrial complex the greatest purveyors of international poverty that exists in the world today. Just like I'm sure we've gotten on the wrong bandwagon in the Pakistan-Indian conflict. And mainly because of our military-industrial complex, the committed resources are the resources granted to Pakistan. Now, I think that both Pakistan and India are wrong, but I certainly think that the Aga Khan, as Chiang Kai-shek was, is pretty much of a dictator. And I certainly think that we are going into a situation like we went into China, where we supported Chiang Kai-shek, where the people themselves did not support him. And this is all because of the profit motive involved. And country after country, and this is one of the sickening things, one of the unbelievable things about our foreign aid program. Our foreign aid is available to dictators, or available to controllers, that will allow our military-industrial complex to exploit a situation. We will allow the dictator or the controller to get rich. But what we are doing for the masses of the people is so nil until they all around the world, people kind of feel like all America want to do is exploit us. Now, I think our military-industrial complex is structured to maintain the status quo and to protect the profit motive, which I say is destroying the American way of life. Right here at this institution. The thing that I'm really worried about is what type of education, or what are you being educated for? I certainly don't see things get any better in this country. I think we have as I told the Chinese, one of the greatest countries on the face of the earth. I think we have one of the most God-blessed countries, but certainly the dope problem is becoming a greater problem among the young people every day. the future of America has already been damaged. Now, how much, I don't know, but certainly it's been damaged by the massive use of drugs among our youth. You look at our crime rate, we have one of the highest crime rates of any nation in history. Our school dropout is at an all-time high. This is a serious matter. And while the rich get richer and the poor keep getting poorer, but the average American is just a tool for the establishment that maintain the status quo. And I said they don't educate you, they train you. Now, when I talk about prevails of international poverty, certainly this is one thing that I have to look at on the American scene. And I said that the military-industrial complex is what Rockefeller, and I said the military-industrial complex is what Ford and what DuPont and Carnegie and just a few American families. Now, in China, it's not the rich elite families. In America, you have the rich elite families, but in China, what you have is the intellectual elite. Mao has never been a rich man. Of course, he's rich now because he owned China. Mao owned China. But it's the intellectual elite in China that came together and used the military-industrial complex to defeat the rich elite. And for the masses of the people, that is a question in my mind. I was trying to understand, when I look at China, how controlled things are, how regimented almost every aspect of life. But I turn right around in America, and in a way they're doing to us the same thing that the Communist Party is doing to the Chinese. They tell you we have no control, that we have free enterprise. But there's no free enterprise in this country. There's socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor. Anytime they'll stand up there in Washington, D.C. and appropriate millions and millions of dollars to sustain a defunct company like Lockheed's, and every time they turn around, they're talking about merging. Every time you pick up the Wall Street Journal, some magnate, some huge companies are merging. But if I go out in the street and try to organize a few businessmen to come together, somebody's going to say, that's communism. So we don't have private enterprise in this country. What we have is private enterprise for the poor. We have socialism for the rich. The airline can't lose no money. They're subsidized by the federal government. The military-industrial complex, when I talk about international prevails of poverty, and you and I sit right by. This would worry me. This is our country. Somehow or another, Rockefeller think God gave it to him, but he didn't. It's our country. The war in Vietnam has nothing to do with it's all part of a psychosis, a sickness, the profit motive of our life. The same thing that killed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is perpetrating that war in Vietnam. The same thing I feel that killed President Kennedy is perpetrating, but it's so strong because one of the things that I always worried about, why Bobby Kennedy didn't say more about President Kennedy's death. Maybe if he got to be president, he was going to do so. And maybe that's why they had to knock him off before he became president. Now, I know the CIA is here. They're everywhere. They just like to air. But when you think of the war in Vietnam, and I say I saw America at its worst in Vietnam, the war in Vietnam has nothing to do with this national security of this country. Nothing whatsoever. Actually, the war in Vietnam is an economic war. We all know it. We do nothing about it. We know it's a war where the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poor. We know it's a war being fought by black and poor white people. And I returned to the country very saddened about the peace movement, which I don't think the peace movement can be so naive that they think Richard Nixon is ending the war in Vietnam when he's changed it from a manual war to a technical war. But honestly, we had lost the manual war in Vietnam. As Mao Zedong said, a little nation can defeat a big nation when the big nation is wrong. And that's the same thing I think will happen in India. Now, but what I'm trying to say, I see very little difference in the end. Some difference in the means when I look at the military-industrial complex of China and compare that with the military-industrial complex of America. In China, the military is supposed to be the good guys. They'll tell you that in China that the wage gap is so close that a doctor will make 175 yens a month, but the janitor at the hospital, he makes 75 yens a month. But if you look at the control of the economy, now the way the Chinese industrial complex works, it has, to some degree, and I have to be very particular I say this, but to some degree it has been a more benefit to the nation. Now that's one reason is because the masses of the Chinese people, their quality of life was so much lower than the quality of life of the average American. But in China, it's the control, I said, by the intellectual elite. For instance, you take the army is self-sustaining in China. In China, the army, as I said, they're the good guys. On the countryside, what happens is, if anybody get behind in their crop, the army goes out and help you plant your crop. If a house burned down or there's a flood, the army comes in. The army has its own farm, it has its own factory. So it's pretty much self-sustaining, but then the latitude of the private enterprise does not exist. I'll have to admit in China, it admits here. Now, I want to say this about China, because I think this is terribly important. I went to China as a Christian. I went to China as an advocate of nonviolence. I went to China as an American. I went to China mainly because of the frustration that I have developed here in America in, say, the last 10 years. And I certainly want to say something about that because I think it has to do with whether the future of our country and what is really going to happen in America. You know, I start thinking that in 1877, America had a good chance to free black people. That was right after a perpetration of a civil war by still the military-industrial complex. But I think America had a wonderful chance to free black people right after the Civil War. But instead of freeing black people for the need of exploiting people, in order to maintain the economy, because I don't think anybody can ever think that we'll ever stabilize it. Like Choen Lau said, one thing he said to me that I will not forget, he said, how would you like to be a citizen of a country that does not owe one dime national debt nor one dime international debt? And he said, you know, America's going bankrupt just from the national debt alone, that you can't keep living on credit. But back to the struggle of the blacks, I just began to feel that America really doesn't have the integrity. America doesn't have something, I don't know what you call it, to free black people. Because suddenly they had a good opportunity after the Civil War. And then Ruther B. Hayes came along and pushed blacks back almost but in slavery for the next 100 years. And during our contemporary time with Martin Luther King Jr. and other contemporary leaders, I think they brought us back up to the gate of freedom. But instead of freeing us, and this is the decision that the military-industrial complex had to make in America, they murdered Malcolm X, they murdered President Kennedy, they murdered Bobby Kennedy, they murdered Martin Luther King Jr., murdered Malcolm X, and I could just keep on of those who stood up in dissent that was murdered. I was carried to jail 81 times myself, and I haven't broken a record. And then after all of that, then here come the Nixon administration. Unquestionably is desirable of going down in history as the Ruther B. Hayes of the 20th century. And this is not funny because the Nixon administration has been very, very effective. No longer can we sing, we are climbing Jacob's ladder, because Nixon has knocked all of those spokes above our head off. And it's very difficult to even sing, hold on to what we scuffle and suffer so dearly to gain. The Nixon administration has been very, very effective. You know, and that's why I worry about black people, because we are being lulled to sleep. And when we wake up, we are going to be so close to being put back in slavery, I think it's going to be too late to do anything about it. And we are not near as free now as we were back in 1867, when, well, you had all kinds of, politically, we had all kinds of congressmen and senators, and in the South Carolina state legislature, there was more blacks in the South Carolina state legislature than there was white. There were 6 black lieutenant governors. We don't even dream of a lieutenant governor now. One cat by the name of Pinchback ran Louisiana for about 6 months. But then it came along the Ruther B. Hayes administration, virtually doing what Nixon administration is doing right now. You take the courts, and I want to say this because I'm concerned. Just take the courts. Well, I'll put it this way. In many ways, we are worse off today than we were 10 and 15 years ago. Now, that's hard for some people to believe. But take school integration. The United States Supreme Court ruled that school integration was not only legally wrong, but inherently wrong 18 years ago, the Supreme Court ruled, and this very afternoon at this very school, the textbooks are still insulting the black people. You know what our real thrust for equal job opportunity in this nation has rewarded us? A swell in the welfare rolls. Our struggle for adequate housing, the man came along with his urban renewal program, and black folks own less land, which is real wealth in America today, and we owned 10 years ago, we own less land today. I just talked with some of the blacks here that there was an article in the New York Times 2 days ago where black colleges are about to become extinct. All of this is because of the economic thing. The black colleges no longer can compete with the white colleges for the better black brains because they don't have that money to give that scholarship. The black colleges can no longer compete with the white colleges for the super black athletes. They don't have that scholarship. So much now the white colleges are taking away all the decent black teachers out of the black colleges. They're leaving Morehouse Atlanta University for $12,000 a year, coming up here for $15,000 and $16,000. You take the courts, and here's one thing that I'm just trying to show you some of the things to favor out what I'm talking about. Under the Kennedy administration and the Johnson administration, at least President Kennedy had projected such positive attitude in this country till the courts were beginning to deal with cases on the merits of the case rather than on the color is involved. So we got at one point that we could march all over this country. We could march, and one thing we always carried in our mind, if they beat us too bad, and our job was to expose America for what America really was. Our job was to take the cloak of hypocrisy from over America and stand up before a mirror and say, now look how evil. And they'd pass a civil rights bill, and they'd pass a voters bill. But at least we march with the weapon that if they beat us up too bad, treat us too inhuman, Kennedy would send the feds in. Johnson would send the feds in. And the opposition had to labor under that same point. Don't beat them up too bad because the feds would come in. Now, under the Nixon administration, we know if we march and if we are murdered in mass, no feds are coming in unless they're coming in to finish killing us. And the white racists across this South know too. We do what we want to them because Nixon is on our side.
Now, that reason I made this trip around the world. And I went to China, and there was a lot wrong with China.
But it's very difficult for me to try to understand the dynamics of the operation of America, which I consider the policy making by the military-industrial complex, when you've got a country like China with nearly 1 billion people, poorly educated people. China is a poor country. But in China, everybody was working. It's probably the best fed nation in the world. All the kids were in school. And there was virtually no dropout and no apparent drug problem among the youth. Everybody was in housing. I'm talking about the basic necessities of life. Now, some of the housing was very poor. Very, very poor. But nobody was worried about being evicted for the lack of rent come the weekend. No crime rate as we know it. Unfortunately, there were some political prisoners in China, some political and religious prisoners, been in prisons 20 years. But the rape, the robbery, the murdering, the stealing. Now, I know there are some dynamics about party control. But then I come back home to our home, my home and your home, the richest nation in the world, with 1/4 of China's population, where millions of able-bodied men and women, black and white, cannot find jobs. We got the highest crime rate of any nation in the world. Prostitution is flourishing throughout this nation. According to our living standards, there are thousands of families, millions of families in this nation living in housing not fit for cattle according to our living standards. And every weekend, there are thousands and thousands evicted into the streets of America without shelter. a religious democracy. Now, I ask you, if you compare the way that atheistic, irreligious, militaristic China can afford the basic necessities for everybody, America is a poor example of a religious democracy. But come back to the cause of the problem. So, because I'm so caught up, I'm convinced now, they keep hanging us up on the symptoms of the problem or the problem. But we're not going to do anything or get anywhere as a people or as a nation until we start dealing with the cause of the problem. In other words, if I hadn't eaten today, by now I'd have a headache. Well, a headache is really not my problem. It's a symptom of my problem. My problem is the lack of food in my stomach. And I can take all the aspirins I want to take. My problem will be there. Now, you know what I think the cause of our problem is? The military-industrial complex. While I think China is the most militaristic nation in the world, I think America is the most violent nation in the world. And I think until we are willing to stand up, it's just very difficult for me to see how we keep standing by. The war, go back to the war in Vietnam. You know, when I went to Vietnam, I went to a barrack, and I don't want to exaggerate. I slept in some huts 2 nights. But I believe 90% of those young men were on one type of drugs or another, 90%. And it comes out of frustration, it comes out of boredom, it comes out of their being dehumanized by being so demoralized, feeling that they are going to die a useless death by a war perpetrated, an economic war by our military-industrial complex. Now, I don't want anybody to, well, I know I don't have time to explain it all, but as I say, I saw some serious problems in China. There's too much regimentation. They've almost, well, they have destroyed religious freedom. They've destroyed almost individual freedom hardly exists there. The Communist Party, if human freedom would be scaled from 1 to 100, the 5%, they say 5%, leaves a latitude about, say, from 1 to 10, and that's about the limitation of individual decision. You know, the college education, of course, I'm really worried about the direction in which American universities and colleges, our education is going, because we are so directed toward that profit motive of life until it's destroying the integrity of this country. We graduate from school, and what is an education? It's acquiring some academic knowledge and finding a job to make a lot of money. One's dignity is determined by his wealth, whether he got it through prostitution, whether he got it through peddling dope. But this is the first year they've had academic activity at the university level in the People's Republic of China. And the youngsters who are graduating from high school now are automatically assigned to the countryside for 3 years, or a factory for 3 years. You have to work 3 years before you even qualify to go to college. And then the only way you can get into college is your peers elect you, those that you work with. They call that developing leaders void of opportunism and void of revisionism. I found China to be such a very indifferent place in what America had taught me. I do believe Mao is right when he said, Zhou Enlai is right when he claims that the Western financial interests, which I consider the military-industrial complex, but tried to crush China through isolating her. And when they woke up one morning, China was militarily one of the most powerful nations in the world, and they said, this is why Mr. Nixon is inviting himself to China. But my friends, I see such a defeatist attitude and such complacency now, even in the young people that I really thought would face the challenges of the time. I spoke at a school the other day where I used to draw like 2,000 students. And it was 1,000 outside playing when I walked up, and people had signs everywhere passing out leaflets. About 200 students came inside, and the other 800 stayed outside playing Frisbee. Complacency like I've never seen it before. Don't want to even deal with things from an academic level. Let's more on a practical level. I will say this about that profit motive of life because I'm concerned about that. Now, that was some of Dr. King's teachings. And Dr. King, the first one, kind of got me on this road, and I certainly have not been able to develop, as he said he went on at the top of the mountain, but I'm certainly trying to climb it. You know, I often think about Dr. King, who the last year he lived, he earned $600,000 from speaking alone. That's not the money he got from foundations or from rich friends, but just from speaking. He earned $600,000 the last year he lived. That's not counting those other 15 years out there in the movement. And when he died, he left his wife and family less than $5,000 total estate. Now, what happened to that money? Women who normally would go out and pill their bodies to feed their young ones. Men that would lay awake in alleys and lanes at night, their occupation was robbing and stealing. I know what happened to the money. Now, China has a program which they call marrying intellectualism with labor, which is supposed to alter the profit motive of life. In China now, the most beautiful artists there, and they have some swinging artists, paints the most beautiful pictures, and there's no name attached. Trying to move that self-aggrandizement, that profit motive. In China, the most beautiful songs now are being written, and people are just dancing and singing the songs. No one knows the author. But this meshing of intellectualism, and that's nothing new. And that's why, I asked him one thing in China. If you just forget all this stuff about life after death and tell me one thing that Mao Zedong is teaching that Jesus Christ didn't teach, because Dr. King used to talk about, and he's talking about meshing intellectualism with labor. He used to talk about, don't allow your lot in life. Do not allow your lot in life to determine your dignity. Whatever your lot in life fall to be, just be the best of that. He had a way of explaining it, saying, if it falls your lot to sweep streets, just sweep them like Michelangelo paint pictures. If it falls your lot to pick up garbage, just pick up garbage like Chopin, like he wrote music. But in China, all of the intellectuals go out into the countryside for at least 2 months. Now, everybody don't want to do it. No use to be telling you everybody want to do it. But I want to give you an example of one doctor at one hospital. I said, Doc, you obviously been practicing medicine 30 or 40 years. He said, that's right. He said, and I said, how were you able to make this change? And he said, well, when liberation came to China, I didn't want to leave my country. I tried to understand what Mao was talking about. He said, so be able to criticize Mao's advocacy or Mao's teaching in a positive manner, I wanted to expose myself as much as possible. So I decided to go to the countryside, go to the ghetto, go to the farms of Mississippi for 2 weeks, 2 months. And they say, when I went out there, I found something, and the same thing Dr. King talked about, in this affluent society, there's a lonely island of poverty. He said, I never knew the peasants had such a low and human quality of life. What terrible housing they had. What inadequate diet. How they slaved and how they labored. He said, the thing really touched me, because I've lived here in China all of my life, and I just had never seen it. He said, but there was another side of the coin, and that's how human they were. How they loved and respected one another. How they was concerned 7 days a week, and not just on a Sunday morning. He said, Mr. William, I ended up not staying 2 months, but 9 months. He said, when I returned to this hospital for the first time in my life, I treated a human being. All up until that time, I had been treating diseases. He said, now my mind go back and I think when a poor person used to walk in my office, and how I just didn't look at him, how to me it was a thing. And then a college professor walked in. He said, what gave me that right to judge human dignity on those bases? I'm going to close here, but my friend, the thing uppermost in my mind is really what life is relevant. I know you can't decide for me, and I can't decide for you. But our country is in a terrible fix. And we visited 17 countries around the world, and you may not believe this. I said to the Chinese people, I want to make one thing clear. I love America. I love America because America is my home. I said, I hate America's hypocritical ways, but I love America. And as I've heard some of y'all talking about black folks going back to Africa, I said, I can't go back where I've never been. I've never been to Africa. I'm not an African. I'm an Afro-American. My ancestors was from Africa, but I'm from America. I said, I'm sure if we wanted to go back, Richard Nixon and George Wallace would get some ships together. It'd take a lot of them, but they certainly would get some together. But America owes us too much. We made Cotton King. And I said, I want to let you know, we're not leaving America. I want to make that plain. I love it. That's my home. But if you love America as you say you do, just begin to stop and say to yourself, look at the religious forces of this nation. The young people, we are going to have an atheistic country, and not for long, unless the churches become relevant in the lives of the young people. Young people are tired of people preaching about one thing on Sunday, and they see a whole different lifestyle from Monday to Saturday night. They're tired of that hypocrisy. We went to St. Patrick's Cathedral, and I'm just worried about it because I came back, when I left, I was just about ready to pack my bags and just pull out. And maybe see would Nyerere accept me, or see would somebody accept me. Gawain in Nigeria or somebody. But I returned to this country convinced it is better to light one candle in the custard darkness. And I'm not going to feel defeated if I have to stand all alone. Thank you very much.
That was civil rights leader Hosea Williams speaking on the national effects of America's versus China's military-industrial complex. His address was recorded at the Iowa State University Institute on World Affairs, examining the role of the military in the world, 1971. Another participant at the Institute was Theophanis Stavro, professor of modern European history at the University of Minnesota, who lectured on militarism in the modern world, the Greek experience. Here is a portion of his address.
As a matter of fact, even though I have been quite interested in the Greek situation, the last time I spoke about the Greek political situation was on the 23rd of April of 1967. And just a week earlier, I had read a paper which had been written by one of my undergraduates who had accompanied me to Greece the previous summer. And this junior in political science department at the University of Minnesota had concluded around, I think she turned her paper in around the 15th of April, she had concluded that on the basis of the political instability and economic problems, as well as suspicious atmosphere which characterized Greece during those years, it was really quite legitimate to expect some kind of a revolution, possibly a military coup. This was an undergraduate, you see, who had studied the Greek situation approximately 6 months, but who had also gone to Greece and spent 3 months. And she had traveled extensively, mind you, with Papandreou himself, as she was especially concerned about the activities of the Center Union Party. I feel compelled really to begin with this statement because soon after the coup occurred, a good many respectable political scientists and sociologists, they were beginning to take really credit, or at least they wanted to get credit for the fact that they had prophesied the coup in Greece. Well, of course, sociological and political analysis and prognosis and what have you can always give interesting results. But the point I'm trying to make is, in fact, that even an undergraduate who was sensitive at all could have guessed that in 1967, if they really were at all concerned with what was going on in Greece. Well, 2 days after the coup occurred at the University of Minnesota, which as a good many of you realize was at some point or other and still remains a center of Papandreou fans. At the University of Minnesota, some of the professors who knew Papandreou personally decided to have a panel discussion. And I was invited to participate in that panel discussion. That was the last time I participated on any political discussion of the Greek coup. And at that time, everybody was, of course, extremely excited about what had happened to Greece, and everybody was saying that the coup would not last more than 2 or 3 days, maybe a week or 2, maybe really by summer when the Greeks would start going to the beaches, then the colonels would really join them and the whole thing would be over. And the statement that I made at that time was that the colonels were there to stay for approximately 5 years and maybe 10. Now, this business of the military, for example, as far as I am concerned, and I am a historian of modern Russia, a student of history of modern Russia and of the modern Near East, and as far as I am concerned, really, there is hardly a year or a page in the history of modern Europe or in the history of modern Russia or in the history of the modern Near East which can be divorced from some kind of a military adventure. Now, in other words, militarism has been very much an essential and an integral part, really, of the modern world. It has, in fact, been a tremendous force, a tremendous stimulant to modernization, and I think it is with us to this very day. I really was amazed. I was amazed by the fact that beyond really the description, besides the description of battles, military history of that sort, very little had been done to ask very important questions about the role of military, even though this issue has been with us. Now, I said earlier that I became convinced that as I was trying to fit the Greek example into some kind of theoretical framework or model, I was becoming increasingly disillusioned, and I just simply could not do it. And I finally said to myself, why do I have to make it fit? Let me really take a look at it and see what it is for itself. And as a matter of fact, I really reached the conclusion that maybe the Greek coup could best be treated not as a revolution, as has been described by most people, and as in fact has been claimed by the colonels themselves, but maybe it should be described instead as a preemptive counter-revolution. It seems to me this might make a little bit more sense. Now, the revolution which took place in Greece in 1967, in a way, should not be talked about at all, because of the counter-revolution, the military coup, should not be talked about at all, because by now it has become almost like a nightmare to those who study it carefully, and to those who really are interested in it out of curiosity, they probably know the basic outline anyhow. Well, if I dare to take a few minutes and outline it for you, and I'm concerned especially about what happened just on the eve of the coup, it's because I guess I want to emphasize really the tragicomic aspects of this event. Because oftentimes I have a suspicion many people know that a coup occurred in Greece on April 21st of 1967, but they still simply cannot understand how it happened. And I think some historian, or maybe a literary figure, who is much more eloquent with words, will reflect on the 20th, the 21st, and the 22nd of April of 1967, and possibly write a tragedy or a very nice story which will read very smoothly and which will enable people really to understand this development without having to stretch really their mind and being confused about the names of individuals who are really pushed out of office and what have you. But you see, if I were to take you by hand, for example, and if we were to walk down the streets of Athens, really on the 20th of April, most of us would have really been convinced that the Athenians were having as good a time as they had ever had in their life, that most of them probably had their retsina or their ouzo, and that they were simply enjoying the sky before they would go home and have their evening rest, and that everything really functioned very, very normally in Greece on that day, in Athens especially on that day, and the last thing that anybody would have thought of was a coup. And yet, at 2:30, the morning of April 25th or 21st, things began to move. It's very interesting, really, that the king himself expected some kind of a military coup. The king, in other words, was always afraid, at least people who have been talking with him ever since, have come to the conclusion that he himself was always afraid that some kind of a military coup would try to enforce some sort of unconstitutional solution to Greece's problems. He was very much concerned about that, and that he himself was trying to keep abreast of the situation. Others also thought that the military, there were rumors really in the atmosphere that the military might try something because they were becoming rather upset with the success of Mr. Papandreou and especially the forthcoming elections in May of that year, which really were promising some kind of victory to Mr. Papandreou. Now, rumors were in there, but nobody really knew the exact date. Nobody really knew who was going to head this kind of a coup. Nobody knew who was supporting it and what have you. That is why really there was total confusion when on the morning of April 21st, really, Mr. Patakos, who was of course in charge of the tanks division in Athens, he himself suddenly from his training center outside Athens, he ordered his tanks to move toward Athens. In other words, it was a most perfectly timed move, really, to get hold of all political elements and of political challenge or threat, actual or potential, you see, ranging all the way from the extreme left to the extreme right. Now, this is really what confused everybody, because as the news started coming in, you see, that somebody was really arresting somebody, they simply could not make up their own mind who was behind this whole thing. Because when they said, for example, that Papandreou was captured, then they would say it must be the military. But when they said that Kanellopoulos was also captured, then they simply could not understand it. In 1 hour, we have this completely brought about coup with extraordinary speed, efficiency, perfectly well timed, eliminating really, in a real sense of the word, all opposition. As a matter of fact, I think in the future, people are going to call it maybe the wonder of the second half of the 20th century in terms of coups. I could not understand, for example, and I have not been given a satisfactory answer, when the Papandreou factors in this country, they go around and they say that there was not really support whatsoever for the military takeover. Maybe there was no support, I will come back to that, but the fact does remain that they were able to appease the masses and to appeal to specific points which the masses understood. Especially, I'm talking about the lower middle classes in Greece. Now, what do we do at this point now? Are we going to praise the military, or are we going to accept it? Well, I don't think it makes any sense whether we praise or accept it. It's there, whether we want to recognize it or not. I mean, for students of history, it seems to me, what is important for ourselves to ask is to ask this question. In other words, are these people going really to lead modern Greece from this unfortunate state in which they find themselves? In other words, the Greeks who have paid with civil liberties, that is to say, with the civil liberties during this period for peace, is the military going to serve as an agent of transition into a constitutional development? This is the big question. In other words, the colonels may not realize it, but what they may be doing now is are giving both the Greek people and the Greek intellectuals, those who have been silenced, a chance finally to reflect upon the real value of what freedom is. I am not really all that pessimistic about Greece. Greece will survive very nicely. They will shake this nightmare, you see. And the ones who will shake it are not the politicians. The ones who will shake it are the little Greeks, those devilish-looking little Greeks whom you may find actually walking barefooted sometimes on the docks of Piraeus and what have you, and who may appear very indifferent at times, but when suddenly become obsessed by this idea of freedom, they are absolutely matchless.
You have just heard excerpts from a lecture on militarism in the modern world, the Greek experience, an address given by Theophanis Stavro of the University of Minnesota at the 6th Annual Iowa State University Institute on World Affairs, dealing with the topic, The Role of the Military in the World, 1971. Earlier on this program, you heard civil rights leader Hosea Williams speaking on the national effects of America's versus China's military-industrial complex. This program was made possible by a grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and was recorded through the facilities of WOI in Ames, Iowa. This is NPR, National Public Radio.